Okay, I want to finish this up by spending a little bit of time talking about uh, basically companies that have succeeded. Now, as we mentioned before, I would argue that the main reason why Ford, at least in its early days, outstripped other competitors, and actually probably for the 17 and 1800s and even most of the 1900s, the major reason why trade created value or why companies succeeded was because we found ways to increase the gains from trade. However, in the last 20, 30 years, I would argue that most of the companies we think about as titans, the ones that are the big success stories, succeeded because they found ways to reduce transaction costs. So, some examples. Well, obviously, we think about how it started. Amazon primarily, the whole function of Amazon was to reduce the cost of finding people to trade with. Amazon initially didn't offer its own products. It was just a central clearinghouse with a set of contractual things that made it easy to find people. We also, I know we don't use this a lot here in Billings. I'm not sure why. Other locations, it used to be at least a big thing. Craigslist made it relatively easy to find people. It had nothing to do with negotiation. It had nothing to do with enforcement. You would just, I think Facebook Market does this a fair bit now, where people, at least here, that seems to be dominant over Craigslist, which is, and for that matter, Facebook really made it easy to find people. So a lot of, at least, Google, why does Google exist? Google has existed mainly because it made it easy to find people to negotiate. Uh, Negotiation, companies that you can think of that maybe fit in there. eBay. eBay did very little with enforcement initially, made it somewhat easier to find, although I actually find it harder to find things on eBay than I do on Amazon. So I would argue that eBay focused primarily on the negotiation piece. And there are other auction sites or other things that do that make it easier to negotiate. Enforcement, now if you think about eBay and you think about some others, eBay eventually started using PayPal. Now, PayPal, that's where my understanding is Elon Musk got most of his money, was from PayPal. PayPal basically, and now we've got Venmo and other services. The main area that they operate in is making it easy to enforce the exchange. So again, I would argue that this is an analytic framework. So for any of you who are interested in business or interested in understanding businesses, you could think about the main function. Let's think. Let's think about where Uber fits. Now, I've taken a lot of Uber this year. I've taken a lot of Uber for the last few years, mainly in the winter when my motorcycle's in the garage and there's snow on the ground, like there is yet again. I'd hoped that we were out of that, but again, at this point, it doesn't really matter since I am staying inside for the foreseeable future. But Uber, where does Uber operate? Well, Uber really has succeeded by making it possible to find people who are willing to both either serve as passengers or as drivers, to negotiate. It's an upfront specified price, although it does fluctuate depending on peak times, and also to enforce, although enforcement is a little bit more problematic. One of the main ways they do deal with enforcement is reputation. eBay did the same thing. I rate my drivers, they rate me. Drivers can turn down passengers with the low rating, and passengers can turn down drivers. But another one that they use, another service that we oftentimes take for granted, is Visa. Visa is almost exclusively focused on the enforcement. They're not making it easy to find people or negotiate necessarily, short of the sticker in the window that says what's going on. That they take Visa, or they take American Express, or they take MasterCard. Visa is a major service that we rely on that exists not because it has particularly good technology, but because it has a good contract. When you sign up for a Visa card, if you look at the fine print, you will see pages and pages of fine print specifying the rights and responsibilities of both those who accept the cards and those who carry the cards. Turns out that if you look in there, there is a restriction. There cannot be any minimum purchase. Anybody who takes Visa with their machine cannot accept or cannot require a minimum purchase. Now that's useful to know because I have been in situations before where I was at a shop and they out in the coast of Virginia and they say, or in the mountains of Montana, and they say, look, in order to accept Visa, we're going to need a $20 purchase. Now, it turns out in that instance, if you get on the phone with Visa, Visa will pull their right. If they insist on that minimum purchase, Visa will pull their right to accept Visa cards. And as soon as you point that out to them and get Visa on the phone, they will back down and understand that there is no minimum purchase. Visa, again, you can dispute charges, but Visa actually also has an adjudication system. If you dispute a charge, they can turn you down, and you don't really have recourse. You pretty much have signed on to a private enforcement system when you sign on with Visa. So those are some examples. Now there's some other examples, and one that I would argue has Apple, now maybe just kind of an accepted thing, but in my lifespan, since I graduated from undergraduate, Apple went from an also-ran thing for fringe small groups to really a very dominant technology, to the point where the university provides me with Apple products. I use almost exclusively Apple products. None of this is because, in my view, Apple's products are technologically superior. The iPad took off not because it was a better format. Sony had a much better format with their Discman, or they had these mini discs, and you could store a lot more on them. You could swap them out like cassettes in seconds. They were skip-free largely. It was a better format and a better technology. But what Apple had that the Sony did not was they had a contractual innovation. What really you can trace Apple's success to the rise of iTunes. And why was iTunes a success? It wasn't necessarily a better format. It came with a bunch of restrictions, right? It succeeded despite Napster and BitTorrent sites being able to download entire music catalogs for free. And the reason was, again, because it came with a set of contracts. And the contracts were, right, each party signed the contract. It's something people tend to like to harsh on. They tend to like to point out that, right, South Park has made fun of the end user license agreement, the EULA. But basically, they made it so that Steve Jobs negotiated that all songs in the Apple Store and the iTunes Store were the same price, thus making it easy to negotiate. All of them would be hosted within Apple's standard format, making it easy to find. And then they all came with the enforcement of Apple's software management and digital rights management, DRM software, which meant you could only install or listen to the songs on up to 5 devices and a whole bunch of other stuff. Now, that really took Apple, that's the beginnings of Apple taking off. Because after that, what Apple did was extend that same contracting technology, that same transaction cost reducing technology to movies, and then to video. And then, if you think about it, why has the iPhone survived, right? Why has it done so well? This thing hasn't done well because it is a superior technological product. If you go out and look at Samsung's new phones, if you go out and look at a lot of other new phones, they're technologically superior, right? If you go back and look at reviews of the early iPod or the iPhone, people at the time said, technologically, this is an inferior product. And yet, a lot of us ended up using it and liking it. Why? Well, because with the iPhone, Apple also opened the App Store. They made it easy to find people who were developing software and for software developers to find customers. They made it easy to negotiate. Things were typically either standard priced or explicit about whether they require in-app purchases or a variety of other things. And again, it came with Apple's enforcement. Now, some people have complained a lot about that, and justifiably so in many instances, of how long it took Apple to approve products and things being removed from the Apple Store and so forth. You look at the desktop arrangement, Apple now has pretty much done the same thing with software there. When I installed WebEx in the hopes that we would be able to do this seamlessly, obviously a forlorn hope, but when I installed WebEx, I did it through the App Store on my computer, where again, they're hosted on Apple servers. It makes it easy to find, makes it straightforward to negotiate. There's a set of terms and conditions, and it makes it easy to enforce. I would argue again, Apple's innovation was not particularly engineering. Google's innovation, Amazon's innovation, a lot of these innovations have not been technological innovations as much as contractual innovations. Now, you can view different forms of contract as a form of technological innovation, but if I'm separating them out in terms of sort of engineering innovations versus contractual innovations. So again, I find this to be a fairly useful way of looking at the world. If I want to go out and look at what companies I think are going to succeed or fail, or if I want to understand the rise of various social movements, I would say many of them are going to happen either because they found some way to increase the benefit of trade or reduce the costs of trade. And I think if you look at this and apply this and start wandering out into the world, don't wander out into the world now, but at least virtually, if you start looking through news publications or you start thinking about the companies that you give your business to or that you want to interact with, I suspect that most of them have succeeded because they have found ways to reduce, primarily have focused on reducing the transaction costs.